Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chonley. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, well, they lost in overtime to Colorado. They beat Utah. They beat Columbus in overtime. And then they blew four one-goal leads to the Montreal Canadiens to lose in overtime to them. They are 6-1-3 in their last 10 games, which is better than what we've seen in the past couple of months for sure, but the Rangers are giving away a lot of points they very desperately need if they want to stay competitive here.
This is very much a week where, depending on your outlook, you're going to have very different takeaways. You know, you and I are very much in the camp of they're an average at best team that's going to lose games, they're going to win games, but you can't make sweeping declarations because each of these games are so volatile. And then, you read some of the writers of record and you say, well, Rangers have positive weekend. And it really depends on how you feel about the direction as far as, do you think they're pushing for the playoffs? Do you think they sell off the expiring contracts? Or do you feel that, hey, I just want to watch a hockey team that doesn't make me want to actively kill myself? Those are really the two schools of it. I was talking about it with one of my friends yesterday. We were watching the game. We were watching the Ranger game and we were watching the football game on Xbox. And as long as the Rangers aren't as bad to watch as they were through November and December, that's really all I'm asking for at this point. I don't expect to make the playoffs. I don't expect the general manager's vision for how to make the team better to align with my vision. I just want watching the team to not be an actively painful and miserable experience the way it was for most of November, all of December, and, the first game or two of January. They are not good. They are not exciting, but they are at least not boring. That's the best I've got. The game against Montreal, that was, I won't say fun because they lost, but it was watchable. It wasn't a miserable exercise of them skating around with no real creativity, no real chances to create. The defense is still atrocious, but
Awful.
at least they score goals every now and then now. And that's really what it's going to come down to down the back stretch here. We know the defense is not fixable. They have 2.5 defensemen you feel reasonably confident in. And on a given night, it might be as few as one defenseman you feel reasonably confident in. If the offense can score 4 goals, they're going to have a decent chance winning most nights because of the goaltending. If they can't score 4 goals, they're probably not going to win the game. It's really that simple. That's what these final 36 games are going to come down to.
Can you really bank on that? Is
Nope.
the question that you have to ask yourself.
No, because if you don't get the power play goal,
right.
you're talking about 3. You're getting 3 a night. And can you win with 3 a night when you give up 3.5 a night?
The question that Peter Laviolette has to ask himself, Chris Drury has to ask himself, everybody on the roster has to ask themselves, if we score 3 or 4 goals a game, in theory, that should win you a lot of games, right? One, that's not happening because the defense doesn't exist. So you have to score more. The idea that for a team to score 4 goals a game isn't enough because you hemorrhage so much defensively that you have to score more than 4 in order for it to be a comfortable win for you is such a massive red flag that, Stanley Cup contenders don't even come close to that being a potential issue. If a Stanley Cup contender can score 4 goals a night, they are winning the Stanley Cup. And that's the biggest difference that we have to highlight here as we go to the last 40, 38 game or whatever it is for the rest of the season. Real Stanley Cup contenders, if they look at the scoreboard and go, oh, we scored 4 goals tonight. Oh, this is easy. We're going to win the game. All we have to do is just continue to not be complete abominations at defense, and we just win. That's it. For a team like the Rangers, that's not the case. And that is something that has to be bolded in size 72 font for everybody to understand it and digest here, is that the Rangers, even if they do make the playoffs, okay, that's not fixing that problem. The problem's still there. So at this point, it's not even about whether they're not cup contenders. Obviously, I mean, look at the way they've played. But even if they make the playoffs and they bounce in the first round, there's not going to be a whole lot of lessons learned from that.
No.
And the problem of them just completely falling apart defensively is still going to be there. So as much as, Nick and I are going to root for them to make the playoffs, like we want them to win every game. That's the whole point. It's a lot more fun to watch your favorite team win than it is for you to watch your favorite team lose. That's kind of that's not, I'm not breaking any news here. But at the end of the day, if the Rangers want to get serious here, they have to fundamentally address their issues before moving forward, or else they're just going to be spinning their wheels in the mud and not going to get anywhere.
And that's really that's the trick to this. I went on Game Over Montreal and talked about it last night from the perspective of Montreal really had, you don't want to say they had nothing to play for this year, but coming into the year, they knew what they were doing. They knew we're going to keep taking our lumps. We're going to keep giving our young guys, Slavkovsky, Suzuki, Caulfield, Kirby Doc, all of the defensemen, Gooley, Lane Hudson. We're going to give all of these guys as much runway as we can to figure it out. And I said this, I think last week, it might have been the week before on the show, but it feels like the Rangers are just kind of wasting this year, kind of like what it's been to be a New York football fan for a lot of the last decade, where the season's over by Halloween for the NFL in New York, and you just have to sit there for the following 8 weeks and watch them play out the rest of the season. And all you can think about is the offseason, because I think, and I was this morning, I had to get up and go dig out my mom and my dad's car before I did anything today. And while I was
Like
snow
a good
blowing,
son.
like while I was out there snow blowing, I was thinking to myself, damn, the window's over. I really was as the snow was blowing in my face.
By
Because
the way, this is how crazy we both are. Like
I mean,
we're sick. We really are.
I'm a good producer. I'm a good content person. I'm actively thinking about what I'm going to talk about on the show before we go live. I
Sure.
really do. It really does feel to me that the window, as we constituted it, as Panarin's the best forward on this team, Fox is the best defenseman, Shesterkin is the building block. The rest of the components, Trocheck, Zibanejad is the 1-2, Kreider and Lafreniere as top 6 wings. The rest of that premise has disintegrated. Lafreniere got on the sheet last night. That's like his 3rd goal in the last 20 games, whatever. That line was one of the best lines in all of hockey last year. Panarin, Trocheck, Lafreniere. Unbelievable metrics, great offense, and you were willing to concede what they did defensively because they outscored their problems. But this year, they're not outscoring their problems. They are worse defensively, so that's not really working. You go further down the lineup, and you're getting okay results from that Cooley, Zibanejad, Riley Smith, or whomsoever you want to play with them. But again, you're talking about the Stanley Cup and the Rangers last year, the best iteration of the team in the history of the franchise in the regular season, could not make the Stanley Cup final. Now, we're talking about a team that's 3 or 4 tiers worse than that right now, at least 3 or 4 tiers worse than that, where they are in a playoff fight with teams like Montreal and the Flyers and the Islanders, versus last year where we were talking about, well, it's really just them in Florida in the East. And I don't see a path with what's currently here. And there's a whole lot to talk about in that respect as far as JT Miller and subsequent transactions, the purported $97.5 million salary cap. We'll talk about that stuff later in the episode.
Sure.
But the bridge from where they're at right now back to contender status is not just simple as everybody getting the vibes right again. We've used the metaphor of toothpaste out of the tube a lot this season, but it doesn't feel like you're putting this group back together. It fundamentally feels like, even though they took out Kakko and they subtracted Trouba from the group and Gaudreau as well,
Kakko, by the way, played real well.
That's another thing we're going to talk about at some point,
in Seattle. Whom could have seen this coming?
Because I had a subscriber DM me a question he wanted us to talk about, so we'll definitely hit on that as well. But the bridge from where they're at right now, and it's really ironic that we've spent a lot of the last 3 seasons making fun of the Islanders' unwillingness to make a decision. You say shit or get off the pot. Are we going for it, or are we going to bottom out? And right now the Rangers are in that same boat of, can we make the prudent decision here, which is trade Riley Smith, trade Ryan Lindgren, trade Jimmy Vesey, trade William Borgen, get a bunch of extra draft picks into the summer. You get all of the new financial flexibility because you're not paying Truba $8 million anymore. You're going to have that $5 to $6 million of new money in the system that everyone's getting if the cap actually does get to 97.5. And you can really do some things when the summer comes. But you have to be willing to take your medicine in the short term. And everything about the way the JT Miller stuff, which we're going to talk about, is developing leads me to believe that, like you said before, are they going to learn their lesson? Or are we going to do what we did in 2015, 2016, where we see a very flawed team that is really dependent on 2 or 3 guys? And are we going to trade for our equivalent of Eric Stahl in 2025? Are we going to make that type of transaction where it's extremely short-sighted and purely about that season? Or are we going to be honest? Because if you just want to make the playoffs, that's fine. I have no problem with that. Like you said, that's the goal. Make the playoffs. But that's the goal for the guys on the team. The front office and the players on the team, as this season has proved, their interests are not always aligned.
Yep. Well, to piggyback off of what you're saying, the key here is looking at the Rangers in the future. And the problem with keeping Chris Drury as a general manager, even if you love the way he's been, being a GM to this point, let's just say you are an ultimate pom-pom waiver of the way Drury has handled business to this point. If that's true, okay. Hear me out, though. If the goal for the Rangers is to get better long term, is to essentially, for lack of a better word, punt the season, because clearly they're not winning the Stanley Cup this season. Just watch the team play and you'll very quickly realize that they are not a cup contender. Then you have to sell. The Rangers have to be sellers at the deadline in order to, 1, get more cap space, 2, get assets to potentially make trades to make the team better, and 3, they're not winning 30 out of the next 38 games. I'm sorry to break your heart. But that's just not going to happen. The problem with that is that Chris Drury is on the hot seat.
Well, not if you believe the reporting that's out there. That's the other thing that's weird about
I guess,
this too.
But the idea at least is that Chris Drury isn't in the most comfortable job of the 32 in the 32, right? I've lost count at this point. 32 in the NHL. His seat is not the coldest. That's objectively true. Whether or not it's the hottest or whatever, I'm not that. That debate doesn't matter. But it's objectively not the coldest, right? So Chris Drury is not going to sell. He's not, because he knows that there's a lot riding on the record of this team this season for him specifically. He knows that. So why would Chris Drury sell off everybody and essentially tank the last 30 games to look for the future long-term success of this team? Chris Drury is going to, there was a report I saw earlier today that the Rangers were, I think it was from Drancer, that was Thomas Drance of The Athletic, who was the Rangers offered Hedl, I think it was either Lindgren or Strider or whoever it was, and a conditional first for JT Miller, and that fell through. It's if we're trading for conditional firsts in this year, but for the record, it didn't specify what year the conditional first was. But regardless, why are the Rangers trading conditional firsts when they are mediocre at best this season? That doesn't give me a lot of confidence, because again, it's just you're supposed to be getting the firsts. This team,
Will Borgen's going to get a first. Don't worry.
Yeah, right. EJ Raddick with that breaking news. But this team should be acquiring assets.
Yeah,
and it's not this JT. And we'll get to JT Miller in a second, but you should be trading Lindgren. You should be trading Riley Smith. If Zibanejad waives his no move clause, throw a parade. You have to be collecting these assets in order to get better long term. Because at a certain point, you before this whole wild card, playoff situation, there used to be this thing called a 9 to 12 hole, where you weren't bad enough to tank all the way, but you weren't good enough to actually make the playoffs, so you were just kind of in between. And because of that indecision, those teams that were in that 9 to 12 hole kept being in that 9 to 12 hole. And that's where the Rangers find themselves in at this current juncture, where if they are too indecisive, if they don't know where to go, if they don't know how to fix their problems in a correct way, they are going to remain in this hole until someone figures it out. Because trading for JT Miller makes the team better on paper, sure. But again, like I tweeted this out, a couple of days ago, it's like JT Miller's a good player, and I'm not here to disagree with that. Like objectively, he's a good hockey player on the ice, but he's quitting on the Canucks.
You can't definitively say he's quitting on the Canucks. You can't speak.
Watch the way he plays.
I mean, I wouldn't say Mika Zibanejad has quit on the Rangers. I would say he's ineffective. I would say those are different things.
Okay. JT Miller, let's say, isn't playing at 100% of his capabilities in Vancouver right now. If you want to say that, that's fine. That's the kind of energy you want to bring into this locker room? Of all the people that could potentially fix this problem, that's it. Okay, listen. If you say so, at this point, I'm willing to try anything. Screw it.
And looking at it that way, we can have a conversation as far as JT Miller now and because I think it's very instructive that Chris Drury views the solution to his underperforming core of expensive veterans being to add another underperforming expensive veteran to said group. Even if you could conceivably get Zibanejad to go the other way in that trade, you're telling me you're building this team around two 32-year-old centers who are being paid $6.5-7 million a year until 2030. You're telling me the plan here is to pay JT Miller until he is 38 years old, to pay Vincent Trocheck till he's 37 years old, and that's supposed to be the backbone of a Stanley Cup contender. And like, let's say hypothetically, Gabe Perreault's good out of the gate. He's a 60, 70 point forward. He's playing first line right wing. What does the team he's doing that on even conceivably look like? Because Chris Kreider, by the time he is that good, Chris Kreider and Artemi Panarin probably won't be on this team anymore. And if they are, they're going to be diminished versions of themselves. They are going to be playing lower in the lineup, smaller roles. You're going to tell me that you can really see a vision where Vincent Trocheck and JT Miller down the middle in their mid to late 30s is the crux of what is going to be a Stanley Cup contender. Lest we forget, they need 3 new defensemen, realistically. 3 defensemen. They need at least another top 6 wing because Riley Smith will almost certainly be gone next year. What is the path to building a team around 2 guys in their late 30s look like? Because I don't know if you're familiar with what the Nashville Predators record is right now, but building the whole plane out of guys who were really good when Vladimir Tarasenko was on the cover of NHL 15, that doesn't really seem like a great plan.
Hey, they've won 3 in a row. Listen. They're so back, baby, Nick. I don't know if you know this, but they are so back. They've won 3 in a row.
That's an example of positive regression where Nashville isn't as bad as their record has been all year, but like every now and then, even bad teams are going to win 2 or 3 games in a row just over the course of a long season. I fundamentally, like, let's say that package of Hedel, Lindgren, and a conditional first is what it was going to be. And they're effectively giving the money they were giving to Trouba to JT Miller. So what does that do as far as the lineup? So where are you playing JT Miller? You playing him first, second, or third line center? Well, if you traded all that to get him, he's probably playing second or first line. So you're telling me we're going to pay Mika Zibanejad $8.5 million to play third line center for the next 6 years? That's the plan. We're going to pay Mika Zibanejad $8.5 million a season to get 15, 16 minutes per night to be a matchup center, to play the role of a Yanni Gourde. That's what we're paying him for. And that's why I think this is dumb. I think fundamentally, just throwing another name at the problem is not how you fix this. I think the Rangers' obsession with trying to get credibility from other places is why they're in this boat to begin with. That, well, Vincent Trocheck was so good for Carolina, and he was a third line center there, and we think if we play him with Panarin, he can do more. Well, we could have just played Philip Hedel in that spot, or we could have done what the Capitals have done. And if you go back and you go and listen to the 3rd or 4th episode of this show, it was me and Andrew saying they really shouldn't spend on any big names. They should look at the reclamation project bin of guys like Evan Rodriguez and Dylan Strome, guys who need to prove it as NHLers and will work hard and be cheap. And if they work out, great. If not, no harm, no foul. because the Rangers are, and look, yes, the cap is going to go up more than expected this summer. The Rangers are still a relatively illiquid team because all of their players are pretty expensive, other than a handful of the ELC guys. But none of those ELC guys you want to trade because they're your only cost effective players. That's the thing here. Like, yes, is Hedel a volatile asset because you don't know about his health? Absolutely. It's extremely concerning every single time he takes a bump like he did last night against Montreal. You have to worry with
By the way,
bated
that
breath.
wasn't a penalty?
That should have been a penalty.
On what universe is that not like a boarding call?
That's
one right in the numbers.
We say this a lot. If Sam and Joe are complaining about the officials, they're not doing a good job. Sam and Joe are very diplomatic about not getting on anyone because they're trying to be professional. But if the referees are getting it from them, that tells you that that's a missed call. But to the bigger point here, sure, is JT Miller better than Filipino? Yes. Would he be their best center? There's an argument. The answer is yes. That does not mean they're going to play better defense. They don't know what that's going to do for their lineup as far as who's going to play with who and who's going to play where in the lineup, because that's already an issue. You're already paying Zibanejad to be a reduced version of himself. Are you going to shrink his role even more as a means of trying to coax better play out of him? And you're going to add JT Miller, who, again, maybe not the most easy person to play with, to a group that's already kind of fragile. All of this just seems like shiny object syndrome of, well, we can make the team better. We got to do it. And that's how we got here in the first place. That's why they're in this spot.
I think
he's a good player. That's like, not the question.
JT Miller is a good player. I just forget about the on ice side for a second. Thinking from Chris Drury's perspective specifically here, you have to manage the books. It's you're the general manager and the president of this team. It's your job. One of the jobs that you have to manage the books for this team. If you trade for JT Miller without sending out an equally bad contract, you are destroying the long-term prospects of this team, because now you already have a lot of money tied up in only a few players.
What did the great Irvin Magic Johnson say? I'm not going to be here.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm not going to be here.
But that's like that. That's my point from earlier. Is if Drury is going to have the leash to make this trade, then that one tells he's going to be here for either a while or not at all. Because again, why would you, as let's say you're Jim Dolan, why would you let, and we could, I'm not arguing about the semantics of what Jim Dolan feels about the Rangers. I'm not doing that right now. But let's say you're Jim Dolan and you are locked into the Rangers right now. Why would you let Chris Drury make a trade for JT Miller when, one, you have a feeling that he might not make it past when Drury might not make it past this year, when Drury might not be part of the long-term, vision of the front office of this team, and maybe his vision doesn't align with your vision, etc. One, why would you let him make that trade? Two, if you get JT Miller and you don't send out Zibanejad in return, you are adding to the logjam of bad contracts that are essentially immovable. I understand there's a not a loophole, but if JT Miller waives his no move clause to come to the Rangers, and the Rangers essentially JT Miller doesn't have a no trade clause anymore, I think that's the rule. And if I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. But I'm pretty sure I saw something about that earlier. So okay, even if you do get JT Miller and that does happen, he becomes a little bit more movable, sure, but he's still making a lot of money for a long time.
And
so
if you
wanted to get JT Miller off the team in the future, you'd probably have to retain salary to make that happen. So why are the Rangers trading assets to get a guy that is, into his 30s, has a long-term contract, and if you ever wanted to trade him at some point, you'd have to give up, either give up assets or retain a lot of money in order to trade him. That doesn't make logically, again, forget his on-ice contributions for a second. This is purely about bookkeeping.
Yes.
Logically, that doesn't make any sense. If you're Chris Drury, the general manager of this team, you think about that and you go, yeah, why am I trading for this guy? But that doesn't seem to be the case because of all the smoke surrounding JT Miller of the Rangers, all of the potential leaks that have came out that that the Rangers are going to trade for him. There's a few of the AHL guys, like Adam Sikora, was a healthy scratch yesterday. Apparently, that was supposed to be part of the trade until that fell apart. I don't know what this trade could even look like if the Rangers aren't sending a bad contract in return.
I thought of this analogy yesterday. The Rangers are the people that finally, after years, they've been cost cutting. They finally paid off their credit card debt, and they immediately go on like a $5,000 vacation that puts them back into debt. We finally got rid of the Jacob Trouba contract, which we have all agreed for 4 years was actively hindering their ability to be as good a roster as they could possibly be. What are we going to do? We're immediately going to take on another bad contract because he's American and he's gritty and he's an asshole. And we need assholes on this team because that seems to be the recurring theme I keep hearing from the hockey men is the Rangers don't have an identity. They don't have an alpha amongst them.
Yeah.
They had Jacob Trouba.
Also don't have a defenseman.
They have one good defense. Other than Adam Fox, I cannot depend on any of the Rangers' other 5 defensemen on a nightly basis to be consistent. I think they are varying degrees of inconsistent. You know, Miller is fine most nights. Schneider is fine most nights. But when it's bad, it's really an atrocity. Bad. I mean, even Borgen, you know, that turnover on the Suzuki goal, that's a mistake someone makes playing roller hockey at like 12 years old of there's a guy over there to my left. Oh, my teammate's to my left. Whop, interception going the other way. I mean, he's under no pressure at all. Nope. He's got 20 feet of open space in front of him, and he turns it over for no reason. Absolutely under no pressure. And what do we always say, Andrew? There's 2 places to get the puck where you want it to go. You can pass it or you can skate it there. Why you would go lateral when you have 20 feet of open space in front of you, I'll never understand. But
this is a guy the Rangers have coveted, by the way, for a long time. I just want to point that out.
But this is you know what that's a good example of, and this is an interesting way to think about this. They're the person you had a college class with that you thought was cute but never said a word to, and 5 years go by and you check in what they're doing on Instagram. That's what the Rangers have done with guys forever. Remember how much they were talking about Ryan Strome for when they traded for him? Like he wasn't as depressed an asset as humanly possible, and all the conjecture was the Rangers wanted to draft him in his draft year, but they couldn't get that high up the board. We're talking about a guy you traded Ryan Spooner, who was out of the NHL for. You're that excited to get him that we have to relitigate a draft from 5 years ago. Same thing with Trouba. We heard about the Rangers coveting Trouba for years before he ended up finally getting here. Like Borgen is tall. He's American. He is 28 years old and has less than 300 career NHL games played. He is a fringe NHLer. And speaking of the JT Miller framework, and one thing I wanted to talk about off of that, please tell me how the Rangers traded up in 2020. They burned a draft pick to trade up to take Braden Schneider. They took him in the first round. He has gotten every opportunity to play, not ever be accountable in the same way they've held Zach Jones or Nils Lundqvist accountable for bad play when he's been bad. And lest we forget, Braden Schneider has had some atrocious hockey early in his career. If you go look at the underlyings in 21 and 21-22, actively tanking the team when he's on the ice. How can that guy, which they have given every opportunity to succeed, be getting 2 minutes less per game than Will Borgen, who they traded for a month ago and has less than 300 games played as a 28-year-old? How is this not Schneider, Miller, Fox, and whoever, and Borgen playing with Vakanainen? Like, if you're telling me the vision is what we want to have Borgen here long term, then why are you going to pay Braden Schneider wherever you're going to pay him on the next contract to be the third pair right defenseman? You know, we did this 3 years ago when it was Trouba, DeAngelo, Fox. It was too expensive to have all 3 of those guys. Like, even if DeAngelo wasn't a lunatic and impossible to deal with, they wouldn't have paid him. It wouldn't have made sense to pay him.
But that's the woke media's fault, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, hey, man, notoriously woke Russia. Russia found out it was woke the other day, and Putin was very confused. You know, like when Algeria found out it was woke during the Olympics. Very confusing days in Algeria and Russia. But you can't pay 3 defensemen on one side all market value. You know, Schneider doesn't put up a lot of points, so he won't be that expensive. But, like, hypothetically, so what? We're going to pay Borgen $5 million a year, and we're going to pay Schneider $5 million a year, and we're going to have $18 million committed to 3 right-handed defensemen, and that doesn't include a Miller extension, and 2 lefties because Lindgren and Vakanainen are indeterminate on their future. And like, even if you want to say, oh, well, what about EJ Emery or Zach Jones? None of those guys are proven. None of those guys are comfortable in the organization's perspective that you're going to feel good about that. I just don't see. And a lot of this conversation and this episode so far has been like bookkeeping and long term, but like when the season is where it is, where it's maybe a 30% probability, and I have a lot of stuff as far as what they need to do standings wise, and we're going to get to that, but the bookkeeping is infinitely more interesting to talk about right now because we genuinely don't know. Generally, we kind of have a feel for this stuff, as far as what they're going to do decisions because of the contracts, that at a certain point it reaches, well, he's an expiring contract. We're not going to keep him. We need to trade him. That's just how sports work in today's world. I don't know. I know a lot of the media people seem to think Lindgren is almost certainly going to get traded ahead of the deadline, but like, are we really going to trade all of these expiring guys and still add JT Miller? Are we going to buy and sell? Like, none of the vision or the conversation here, it doesn't really add up. It's very incongruent with what's actually going on with the team. And that's why I think it's so interesting to talk about.
That, and by the way, when Zibanejad skated through 2 guys and almost Michiganed against Columbus, I thought I was having a fever dream. Like, as an aside, when I saw that, I was like, wait, whomst did that? Huh? Where has this been? The first, like, not only this season, last season, the season before that, where was this? Also, I think genuinely the last time Zibanejad scored a breakaway was that game against Washington where he scored 5 goals. Like, he's had some miserable luck on breakaways, because
that might have been the game that broke the space-time continuum and has entered us into this weird 5-year window. That was 5 years ago, 2 months from now.
And that's as I tweeted this out when it happened, but also, like, as an aside, like, that's why I'm so frustrated with Mika Zibanejad. It's because he clearly has the talent to do that and just chooses not to. Like, that's been one of my biggest complaints about him. Like, besides the defensive black hole he's been this season, like, brother, you just destroyed 2 guys, and then you try to Michigan. Where has this been? Like, where did this come from? Did I imagine that? Like, was that a figment of my imagination? Why don't you just try to do that against Columbus? Like, bro, if you could do that, where is this more often? I'd like to see it. But yeah, no, like, this team is in a very weird position, but they're not making it easier for themselves. Like I said, like, and you talked about as well. Why are we trading for JT Miller when he doesn't actively solve any problem that the Rangers currently have? Like, the Rangers have scoring issue. They have a top 6 issue. Yes. Does JT Miller fix that to some degree? Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's a hockey player. So by default, on paper, bringing in JT Miller would make this offense better, and also his defense. He's not a bad defensive forward either. But the biggest issue right now for the Rangers is they can't defend anybody. Like, one of the hosts I work with, Brian Geltzeiler on NBA Radio, he likes to say that X player can't hold my spot at the bank. Like, the Rangers right now can't defend it. Like, they can't defend anybody right now either. So if somebody wanted to cut the line at the bank, the Rangers would let them do that because they can't defend. So bringing in JT Miller would fix a little bit of the offense, yeah, but there's a fire going on, bro. You pouring a
JT Miller's a bucket of water.
You're throwing a bucket of water onto a blazing fire. Like, you're not putting it out. You're ignoring the bigger issue here, and that it doesn't align with the trajectory of the team, neither short term nor long term. You are on ice and off ice, right? You mean to tell me that with JT Miller, this team was going to win the Stanley Cup? That's your solution? The answer is no. So you're going to trade for a bad contract to add on to your existing bad contracts, which hinders you short term, hinders you long term, doesn't actually fix your biggest issues now or later. So why do you do this? Again, like, if Zibanejad were to waive his no move to go to Vancouver,
if you were sending Zibanejad out, I could justify it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't do it, but I could justify it.
That's my point. Is if the trade is Zibanejad and like Adam Sikora or and like insert player, like insert non, A-list player here for JT Miller and like a fourth round pick or whatever, that is way more justifiable because at least you're not adding to the pile of bad contracts. If Mika Zibanejad somehow, if you could convince this man to waive his no move, for him to be sent to Vancouver and to get JT Miller in return, that makes a lot more sense. But as it currently stands, if Zibanejad isn't going anywhere and all of your biggest contracts are still on the team and you add JT Miller, that makes zero sense whatsoever.
I, for one, hate that we have to play telephone. I, for one, hate that we've been doing this JT Miller shit for like 3 years now.
Yep.
It is so tiresome. And, this is the type of move. And I fundamentally think this is the type of move that would be more likely to happen in the summer than anything. I think the Rangers this summer are really going to, I really think the summer is when you'll start to see whatever the next phase or iteration of this team come together. But before we get to the summer, I did take the time to put together this spreadsheet as far as the playoff math. So I want to pull this up and talk about this in terms of the postseason. So this is since we started this format, we started the wild card format. 2013, 2014 was the first year of that. These are the point totals of every team to make the playoffs in this format, excluding 2019, 2020, because that wasn't a full season, and 2021, which was only 56 games. As you can see, the average point total in the East to make the playoffs has been about 95.5 points over the last 10 years. It's been about 93 points in the Western Conference. This is what the math says you need. This year, though, we are on pace for wildcard one to be 92.7, 93, and Columbus in the second wildcard spot is currently on pace for 91 standings points, which would be one of the lowest totals since this format started. The lowest ever was the Wild in 2015, 2016. They made it with 87. Last year, the Capitals made it with 91. That's the lowest the team in the Eastern Conference has made it. So conservatively, if we want to say that the Rangers are going to do this, if we want to say the Rangers are going to do this, they probably need to record at least 92 to 93 standings points if they want to feel reasonably good about their chances of making the playoffs.
And by the way, the Caps prize for making the playoffs was losing every game and getting kind of lapped. Like the Rangers skated circles around the Caps. Also, by the way, they didn't really play that well the entire time anyway. Like the Rangers at like 70% of what they could play gave the Capitals fits, and the Caps couldn't score a goal, and they got swept. So
it's a conundrum because you sit here right now. The Rangers have 48 points in 46 games, a 5.22 points percentage. They are currently on pace for 85.5, so we'll round up, we'll say 86 points. To make up the 6 or 7 points that it would take to get from where they're at right now to a playoff spot, that's one good week. The Rangers go 3 for 3 in a short week where they only play 3 games. That's all you need to get right back into the mix as far as being on the inside looking in as far as a playoff spot. The problem is, and I'll go over to this tab here, the Rangers have 36 games remaining. They have 48 points currently. To feel good about your playoff spot, you probably need 94 standings points, would probably almost guaranteed get you in. They have 72 potential points left. To get to 94, they would need 46 points. 46 points would be 23 wins or 20 wins and 6 overtimes, etc. You're going to need to play close to 600 points percentage hockey rest of the way. Now, for 30-something games, that is not implausible. To get to that 22, 23 win mark, you would need to get to the requisite point total. That's not implausible, but it's going to require something they haven't done all year. And like we said more than once on last week's show, they have the capacity to rattle off a couple of nice stretches where they go, 4-6 or 6-9, 6-10. If they can rattle off 2 or 3 of those, they very much can be right back in the mix. The problem is they haven't done that at all this year. If you think that's going to happen, which again, it's possible, they have the capability to do it. But if they haven't done it all year, and the supposition is they're probably going to subtract a player or two from this group anyway. Do you think they can do something they haven't done all year with the most pressure possible on them, with a difficult schedule remaining? We talked about it last week. They got every opportunity because, they get to play Columbus more. They get to play the Flyers more. I think they have one more with Ottawa. They have three more with the Islanders. They have one more with the Devils. They can absolutely make this gap up. The problem is they haven't played well enough to give you any semblance of confidence that they're going to be able to do it. The math is very doable. To win 22 out of 36 games, that's not a crazy ask for a decent team. 22 out of 36 is not mind-blowing. That's very slightly above average. If we're going to say average would be a 500 points percentage, 600 would be about 10% better. 10% better than average is not a lot. 10% better than average is not a whole lot to ask of a team that has a Vezina winner, a Norris Trophy winner, a former two-time Hart finalist, multiple point per game forwards. It's not implausible. It's just going to be really difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, we have examples of recent teams doing it, right? The St. Louis Blues obviously are a very famous example. They were dead last in January, and then they won the Stanley Cup. And a couple of other, the Oilers were bad last season, and they just won everything, and then they made it to the Cup final, right? Like, we have examples of that. And Florida a few years ago as well was also like very middling, like Rangers are currently.
Florida took something like winning 6 out of their last 8 to make the playoffs for Florida. Something like
and then they went to the final. Like, these examples exist, so it's not, especially in modern, like, we're not talking about the 1954 Chicago Blackhawks. You're like, this is current era NHL, and teams have done this. So is it out of the realm of possibility? No. Is it extremely difficult to replicate? Absolutely. And that's the thing where that's what we have to keep in mind here is, like, you could have and you should have beat Columbus in regulation. You didn't. You won in overtime. Okay, so you got the 2 points out of it. You still gave Columbus one. You had every opportunity to beat Montreal in regulation. You had 4 1-goal leads, and you blew all of them, and then you didn't play defense, and then you lost in overtime. These are games that you could have won and gotten points from. Colorado, another one. You didn't have to go to overtime, but you did. And then you lost in overtime. So again, you keep giving up points. These are winnable games that the Rangers have to be, not only winning just winning as a whole. You got to win against Columbus in regulation. You got to win against Montreal in regulation. You got to win against Colorado, even if it's in overtime. Every single point for them right now, if their goal is to make the playoffs, is so extremely valuable. But they keep giving those points up, and on top of that, like you mentioned, the schedule for them doesn't get easier because now, like, most of their second half schedule is against teams that are right there with them in the same situation. You're going to play Montreal, you're going to play Boston, you're going to play Philadelphia, you're going to play the Islanders. Like, all these teams are right there too. They understand, like, they see the standings just like we do, just like the Rangers do. Everybody knows that, like, those games are going to be battle of the death. Whoever's last alive is going to win this game. So the fact that, the Rangers are well aware of that, and they're still playing the way they are, like, better than they have been in November and December, sure, but the bar in those 2 months was so low that, like, by comparison, they're a cup contender just by oh my god, it's not as bad as it was. Oh my god. So the fact that, we know what their schedule is. We know what the path for them looks like to make the playoffs if that's their goal. But you could have banked a few more points here, and you could have taken away some points from teams that need them as badly as you do, and you didn't get it done now. So how much faith do I have that you're going to do that the next 3 months of the season?
So let's look at this, okay? I have their schedule up in front of me. Ottawa, Philly, 2 straight games against teams you're in direct competition with. Colorado, Carolina, teams better than you. The Bruins, about where you're at. Vegas, better than you. Boston, again, where you're at. Pittsburgh is worse than you. Columbus is better than you. Buffalo's worse than you. Pittsburgh's worse than you. The Islanders are worse than you. Toronto, better than you. Nashville, worse than you. The Islanders, Washington, Ottawa, Columbus. Winnipeg, Minnesota, Columbus, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, the Kings. That stretch of the season, which is right after the trade deadline, which is like the 11th through the end of March, that's probably where the season gets determined, where how they play through that game 6 game block of the schedule is ultimately going to determine whether they have a chance, because after that it gets a little hairy. Even after that, you get a slight reprieve with the Ducks and the Sharks, but then it's a sprint to the finish. Minnesota, the Devils, the Lightning, the Flyers, the Islanders, Carolina, Florida, and Tampa. You're telling me we're going to go down the stretch here, play 600 points percentage against a good chunk of that schedule is better than you, just based on how we've played this season so far. And maybe you drop JT Miller into this group. Maybe. I still don't think hanging your hat on just making the playoffs and feeling like that's an accomplishment is something that a group that has cup aspirations as soon as next year should be hung up on. And there's one more thing I do want to say on that. I can see a world where if you wanted to talk me into, well, we want to trade for JT Miller now, so that way, by the time next season starts, we fully know how we want to use him in our lineup, who he's going to play with, all of that stuff. That's not the worst idea in the world. We have seen examples of that thinking work out reasonably well. Ottawa did that with Jacob Chikrin. Ultimately, it didn't work out for Ottawa, but based on where they were in the standings and what they were trying to do, it made sense at the time. When the Flames fired, I forget who their coach was in season, and they brought in Daryl Sutter for like the last 10, 15 games of the season, giving him that 10 to 15 games with like no consequences gave him a head start on what the direction of the team would be in the summer and set them up nicely for what the preseason and training camp is going to be. So if you want to sell it to me from that perspective of trading for JT Miller is about next season, okay, you can get me more inclined to believe that, because I don't think that it would require being almost outright delusional to think adding JT Miller to this team makes them Stanley Cup good. Like outright delusion, like not within the realm of possibility.
And again, I want to highlight that I'm not against the JT Miller trade in essence.
No.
But the biggest caveat is, are you going to send a bad contract back? Because if you don't, then this trade doesn't make any sense at all, and it's just a miserable trade, because you're just making bookkeeping an atrocity to get through for the next X number of years. But if it's a trade that sends out a bad contract and JT Miller comes in, fine. That's okay. I'm not inherently against that. JT Miller's a good player, like we talked about, but you got to make the bookkeeping make sense. That's the biggest concern I have.
Yeah, 100%. That's the big thing here. Again, I'll say it one last time just to be clear. If you can send Zibanejad's contract out or Trocheck's contract out, and you want to do that for JT Miller, that's fine. I think that's more rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic as opposed to plugging the hole in the Titanic, but I can at least understand that. Adding another bad contract, and people will say, well, they're going to have more money this summer. Just because you have money does not mean you need to spend it. That was the conjecture we were having a few weeks ago when they had first traded Trouba and they subsequently traded Kakko was, do you really want to give Chris Drury $15 million of cap space going into a summer to see what he can do? Because lest we forget, the first thing Chris Drury did as general manager of the team was burn $15 million in cap space in a single offseason on a Zibanejad extension, on Patrick Nemeth, on Ryan Reeves, on Barclay Goodrow. That is what he did. He instantly burned money as soon as he had any of it. And as much as I hate the don't eat avocado toast for breakfast people, they're not wrong when they say that people who don't have money their whole lives stay not having their money because they have to spend it. Now, some of that is out of necessity. Poor people have less money to spend. So, okay, that's a good point. We can answer.
I want to highlight this comment here from Segmenta. He says, Miller makes $7 million. What bad contract?
It's the term. It's the term.
Yeah, by the way, I want to highlight it's 8, and he's signed until 2030, which is when he will be 36 years old. That is what makes it a bad contract.
And this is a player who plays a physical, hard-nosed style, which is part of why the Rangers covet him, who has a track record of being semi-difficult to play with. And sitting here right now, he is what, 31 years old. He'll be 32 in, I think, a month or two. I believe his birthday is in March. So you're going to tell me that we're going to go age 33, 34, 35, 36, 37 with a player who might be showing. And like, one last thing, I don't think he's outright only physically declining, and that's why he's playing worse this year than he did last year. But it's not out of the realm of, it's not out of the question that he is beginning a physical decline. You know, we talk about, well,
Sure.
what happened to Mika Zibanejad? What happened to Vincent Trocheck? They're old. You are inherently more volatile as a professional athlete the older you get. Now, you can age better, and we would typically say elite players age better, but is a player like JT Miller going to be willing to and have the puck intelligence, the hockey intelligence to adapt their game? You know, we talk a lot about how the great players reinvent themselves, how Sidney Crosby has become the best grinder in the world because he still has the great puck skills, but he also has understood and mastered how to use his body for leverage. That Sid never loses a puck battle now. And he's got that old man strength where he gets lower than you, he's going to out leverage you, and he's going to win that battle. We talk about it that LeBron has reinvented himself 4 times over the course of his 22 years in the NBA. That's also arguably the best player in the history of the sport. All due respect to JT Miller, he's not on the Sidney Crosby, LeBron tier of player. I think he can be certainly
Breaking news.
effective through his mid 30s.
Yeah.
But even if let's say he has even a modest decline year over year for the rest of his career, which he should because he's entering his early to mid 30s. Do you really want 2 Vincent Trochecks? And like, Trocheck's not a bad player, 60 points.
Kind of has been this season.
He has been, but like
Neither here nor there. Yeah.
let's say from a stat sheet perspective, Trocheck's going to have 50 to 60 points pretty much every year the rest of this contract because he's going to stay on the power play. He's going to stay with Panarin as long as Panarin's a Ranger, because the Rangers have every incentive to try and extract maximum value from him and put him in positions to succeed because they gave him that contract. Now, if they trade JT Miller, I have every reason to believe they would do the same exact thing where he's going to get favorable deployment. He'll get on the first power play. I don't know where he fits in on the first power play if they're not taking someone who's currently on that unit out. I do think that's a question that needs to be addressed as well. But I don't think adding another guy who could very well be in the early stages of physical decline to a group that's already dependent on old players, and I know there are people who say, well, the Rangers are like the 8th youngest team in the entire league. Well, the young guys on the team don't play that big of roles, unfortunately. I like Cooley, I like Hedel, I like Berard, I like Lafreniere. None of those guys is carrying a Panarin or Fox like load on this team. None of those guys are bankable as carry guys, and that's really the Rangers' issue. Even the guys who are supposed to carry the team right now aren't doing that other than the goaltending. And that's why, instead of being what they've been in years past, like what they were 2 years ago, where they were winning games, but they had noticeable and discernible flaws, they're just mediocre now because the guys who were carrying the team, and look, Panarin still has decent counting stats, but he's not carrying the team the way he did last year. I mean,
No.
he was a Hart Trophy caliber player last year. This year, he's just a point per game forward. And that doesn't sound like a big drop off. But when we're talking about over the course of every game in a long season, it does begin to accumulate.
It does, yeah. And the key here to remember again is they were the best team ever in their history last season. They still did not make the cup final, which I understand. We talked about it. It's obviously hard to make it. There's a lot of mitigating factors, but at the end of the day, this is your best team in your 100-year franchise, and you did not make the cup final, and your logic is, okay, we're going to bring back the exact same team pretty much and run it back, and now you're you're not even in the playoff position right now. Then your solution can't be, oh, we're simply going to add JT Miller, it's all going to be fine. There's clearly other underlying problems with the core, and we've highlighted this for we've had this show for nearly 3 years now, and we've highlighted these same problems for the entire duration of the podcast. 5-on-5 has been a problem. Defense has been a problem. Goaltending has been great. Power play has been great for the most part, but at a certain point, if your top players cannot produce a 5-on-5, this team is not going to win the Stanley Cup. We've talked about this for hundreds of episodes at this point, and the fact that you know there's a lot of this is speculation, yeah, and there's been a lot of leaks, and how much the Rangers covet JT Miller is still kind of up in the air, but with smoke there's fire, etc. If the Rangers thought is the best solution to our problems is if we can get JT Miller and he will erase everything, what are we doing? At a certain point, like what is the goal of this team? If they're watching the games just like we are, like we're not we don't have a secret angle or secret
I don't
stats.
think anybody has a great insight into what the vibe, what the direction of the
Right.
team is. I think the ambiguity about pretty much every decision right
Is
now,
kind of the worst part about this.
I think that's why it feels so existential.
Yeah.
I think that's why it feels like this is such a, for to quote to use the Bill Simmons vernacular, this is a sliding doors moment. You know, the Rangers have had their fair share of them, but this kind of feels like the point of no return, as far as once whatever happens at this trade deadline or ahead of this trade deadline happens, they're not going to be in a position to undo that decision, whatever that is, whether that's JT Miller, whether that's trading away all the expiring free agents. And fundamentally, like if we were talking about this just as an exercise and decision making and evaluation, you're not going to get anything great for what you have for Lindgren, Borgen, Smith, Veazey. You're not getting anything
Well, you're
great for
getting a
those.
first round pick for Will Borgen, but that's neither here nor there.
If you got, a bunch of extra picks, you got a bunch of threes, some fours, some fives, they're probably not using those picks to make the picks. They're probably using those in trades over the course of the summer. And that's where I feel like the decisions have to actually happen. I feel like this summer is where you get whatever that next version of the team is going to be. Because even if you add JT Miller right now, I think that's more about next year than the rest of this season. And the problem with that, of course, is he'll be 33 by the time next year's playoffs start. So even if you want to say, well, what's wrong with waiting for next year? Well, again, you're adding volatility to a group that already doesn't have a ton of flexibility. They don't have a ton of great assets. People like Gabriel Perreault. People really like Brendan Othman for the last 2 years. And he can't get in the lineup at the NHL level, even after coming back from injury. And sure, you could say, well, they're going to trade guys and they're going to get spots for him. They'll get spots for Berard. Perreault might come up this year. All that's great.
The Rangers have famously played young players.
They have done a good
positions like
job
that.
with young
Yeah,
players. Even if they play
famously, their track record is just fantastic when it comes to young prospects that need ice time. That's been their bread and butter.
One last thing on this subject before we get out of here. And I forgot who said it on Twitter, but I can't give them credit. But if you're watching or listening and you want credit, please shoot me a DM or leave a comment on the stream. But they said, it feels like the Rangers just decided that Kakko wasn't going to be what they wanted him to, and they just got rid of him. And Seattle looked at him and said, well, we could do something with this. We can do something, And I made this analogy on Game Over Montreal last night, but it's Facebook logic, but like if you ask a fish to climb a tree, the fish isn't going to be able to climb the tree. The Rangers were asking Capo Kakko to be everything all at once.
Just gonna highlight this comment really quickly.
Rempe is better than Othman. Rempe can't play more than 10 minutes.
I don't know who Otherman is. I'm gonna be a hundo P with you. Other Rempe is better than Other Man.
At this point,
that's
if Matt Rempe can be Arbor Jackeye, that'd be a miracle. Yeah. I don't see it.
I'm so over.
It's not worth talking about. It's not worth talking about. There's a reason I didn't write it down in my notes. Great, he fought Jackeye. They still lost. Doesn't matter. It's inconsequential. But and again, shiny object. Instead of talking about how the team is mediocre, they've got people talking about, oh, they're doing a Matt Rempe bobblehead night in Hartford. That's great. I don't care. I
Uh,
fundamentally do not care.
I
There are
want to
more.
watch the same win hockey games. I don't particularly care about anything else.
That's really what it comes down to, man. And look, everybody can watch how they want to watch. That's not like a referendum on what you care about, what you are as a fan. But like, I care about winning. At the end of the day, you only get so many kicks at this can. You only get so many years of prime Shesterkin, prime Adam Fox, and you've already burned 3 of them. And you got close twice. It sucks it took you this long to kind of realize, hey, our core is kind of old and not improving. And it's unrealistic to expect guys in their early 30s to improve. But just to tie a bow on this entire conversation, they have plenty of opportunity in front of them to make this interesting. That's really all I want. Make this interesting, make the general manager make good decisions, and we go from there. We still got 6 weeks till the trade deadline. I think it's March 5th, whatever that Friday is, the first week of March. There's plenty of time for things to happen. Maybe JT Miller happens, maybe it doesn't. I said it, Elliot. If Elliot Friedman can say that and get paid to do it, I can too. It might happen, it might not. We'll see.
We'll
Stay tuned.
see. Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Where's the money, baby? It could happen. It could not. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. And then I'll quote tweet the team putting out the graphic when it happens with this. That's what will happen.
Oh man!
So
It's like
check,
sitting
please?
on the subway and just having a person talking to themselves out loud. That's basically what listening to 32 Thoughts is at this point. It could happen. It might not. I don't know. The people I talk to feel like it might be trending in this direction, but that doesn't necessarily sway my opinion. It's just trying to finish an essay with a word count. That's all 32 Thoughts is at this point. I can't. I prefer to read the written blog because listening to the podcast is just it's insufferable. And like, if
the
you don't want
written
to
blog
talk,
is nice because it cuts out a lot of the fat and it just gets down to like
the notes.
This team talked to this team about that guy.
Yes.
Like it's digestible and it gets to just, this actually happened. Here's here are the
without
details.
A preamble. There's no preamble.
Exactly.
There's no monologue.
Reading 32 Thoughts is a positive. Listening to it, no, I would not.
There's so much superfluous fluff. Everything has 3 minutes of monologue about, well, Elliot, I swear to God, nobody is going to excommunicate you if you just directly say, I have heard this. That's it. If you just say, I heard that the Rangers and the Canucks were really close to this happening and it fell apart. I don't know why, but it fell apart. It doesn't need 8 paragraphs of
it's okay to say I don't know, by the way.
Yeah, that's my biggest frustration is nobody can ever admit they don't know anything. There are, and I hate to say this,
that's a societal thing now more than anything else. Like, dude, you don't have to know everything about everything. Like, you don't please don't fake that you do know. It's okay to be like, hey, like, I can't give you an opinion because I don't know. It's okay. Like, you'll live. It's fine.
And one thing I want to say off of that before we wrap up, I have always looked at sports as the way I talk about and think about sports, I always look at it through an academic lens of what am I trying to answer and how can we get there? And I think fundamentally, if you're not looking at it with a curiosity and I don't know everything, I want to further my understanding, I want to get a better understanding, I think you're missing the boat. I think part of the fun of this is there isn't a definitive answer to everything. There is no one way to do this. There is no right way. There is no wrong way. There is a best way or a better way. And I think constantly looking for a better way to do things is the way you want to think about just life in general.
We should improve society somewhat, and yet you participate in it. Curious.
That's basically where hockey media is at right now, of like, they just act like, wow, these general managers are doing things. And that's the extent of the conversation. It's not they're doing this because...
Oh, you mean their jobs? Oh, yeah. That's
a different story.
Crazy.
That's a different show. Everybody wants to work in sports media. Word to Andrew Marchand.
All right. Yeah, Andrew Marchand. All right.
Everybody wants to work in
sports
media.
There.
All right. That'll do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. Barring a JT Miller trade or something else of consequence, we'll be back next Monday. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, throw the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. And real quick, for Buddy who says Matt Rempe is better than Brennan Othman, why did they take Brennan Othman 15th overall in the draft if Matt Rempe was better than him? Why didn't they take Matt Rempe 15th overall in that draft? All right, we'll talk to you guys next week.
Oh, he was being allegedly he was being sarcastic in that.
Okay.
That's
okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. He's look, I'll before we go, he did he's he was being sarcastic. So
Okay.
you know what?
Sorry about that, Victor.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
Victor foul one. You know what? Like, yeah, you'll get a pass for that. But yeah, it's. I no more Matt Rempe, please. I don't want to hear about him. I don't want to see him. I don't want to see him fight anymore. Please,
Out of sight, out of mind. I'm not talking about him on the show. I'm not thinking about it.
Just get somebody that can play hockey on this team. I just anybody at this point. Get sign Nick. I'm sure it can't. Like, he can't. He sits on the bench for 90% of the game anyways. It doesn't matter who you sign.
I
Sign
too can
somebody.
skate 40 seconds behind the play and throw my body at things after the puck is gone.
Yeah, but you're not